Hello, my name is Corey Schlack. I am in Hume 302 in Professor Bryson's class. I will be doing my artifact on Martin Luther's 4 greatest unintentional accomplishments. The first unintentional accomplishment, or before I go into the four greatest unintentional accomplishments of Martin Luther, I would like to say that people often peg Martin Luther as some sort of radical reformer who wished to divide the Catholic Church at the time. However, Martin Luther was not this person that he's often characterized to be. In fact, he loved the Catholic Church. He was a priest at the time, and he didn't even want to come against the Pope at the time because he respected and loved the Pope. When Martin Luther did end up coming against the Church, it was actually from being pushed out by the Pope itself. And that leads me into my first unintentional accomplishment of Martin Luther, which was the Protestant Church. You see, Martin Luther had no intention of starting the Protestant Church. He didn't want to divide the church at all into two sects. What he did want to do was work with the Pope when he delivered his 99 Theses so that some of the things that he saw that were wrong, like the indulgences, really bothered Martin Luther because he didn't believe they were scriptural. He believed that although he respected the Pope, he believed that we should really found our beliefs on Scripture alone, which is the idea, sola scriptura, by Scripture alone. Upon hearing this, though, the Pope did not like anything Martin Luther said, and he believed he was coming against him, and therefore wanted to excommunicate him / kill him. In reality, Martin Luther fled, and he did not want his ideas to die with him, so this leads into his second unintentional accomplishment, which was his translation of the Bible. And this may not seem that big of an accomplishment due to the many translations of the Bible, but it is truly a great accomplishment because Martin Luther took the Latin Bible and he translated it into German. And the reason this is important is because he translated it into the language of the people and then gave it to the people. You see, this had never been done before, and the people got the Bible and they were able to read it for themselves and to determine what it meant, and they wouldn't have to go before the Pope or a priest to tell them what Scripture said. Oftentimes, or before this, they couldn't do that. They would have to go to the priest or the diocese or the Pope and to hear what Scripture said through them. And even if they got Scripture somehow from the church, they wouldn't be able to read it because it was in Latin. So by translating it into the language of the people and giving it to the people, it just liberated them from the chains of the church. Now, moving on to my next point, when Protestantism really took off, it really transformed Europe and rocked it. But this caused division through Catholicism and Protestantism. There was many wars. In fact, countries were divided. And this, in fact, led to the United States of America. You see, the third greatest unintentional accomplishment of Martin Luther was, in fact, the United States of America itself. The first pilgrims and settlers of the United States were Protestant Christians. They fled Europe due to the fighting and the lack of religious liberty in Europe, and they decided to go to the New World known as America. They started the first colonies, and their first constitutions and laws were founded on the principles which Martin Luther really provided, which was freedom of religion, and every person can come before God on their own. They don't need a priest or any sort of pope to do so. So in this, the freedom of religion and all other freedoms really birth out of this through Martin Luther's revolutionary thinking. Even just the freedom to govern oneself is completely the opposite of the freedom, or is completely the opposite of the idea that the Pope rules over you. The freedom to govern oneself comes from that the people know Scripture and that they are able to do what is right before God. And the last unintentional accomplishment of Martin Luther is that of the civil rights activist who shares the same name as him, which is Martin Luther King Jr. You see, Martin Luther King Sr., when he was younger, went to Germany in a pastor's conference and heard the story of Martin Luther and how he came against the Pope and showed great courage, and he was astounded by this and wondered if this could be applied to the civil rights that were going on in America at the time. At the time, Martin Luther King Sr. was named Michael King, and he was so inspired by Martin Luther that he changed his name and his son's name to Martin Luther King. When he went back to America, he raised his son, obviously with the stories of Martin Luther, and this just inspired both of them. And in fact, Martin Luther King Jr., when he grew up, the stories of Martin Luther never left him. Martin Luther King Jr. Came against the corruption of the United States government and the lack of freedom for African Americans, and really stood with the principles of Martin Luther and believed that because they were made in the image of God, because they were no different from their white counterparts, that they should not be mistreated. And he even cited Martin Luther in his letter from a Birmingham jail, where he said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And through the courage and the inspiration Martin Luther King Jr. got from Martin Luther, he was able to transform and radically change culture. This is the end of the 4 greatest accomplishments of Martin Luther, and I thank you for listening to this. Goodbye.